Today is September 21st, 2008. I'm Ken Schoen with the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. I have the pleasure of being with
Sid Cooley, who's been a resident of Springfield, Massachusetts for 94 3/4 years. I was born here.
Can you tell us something about your family, where your parents' names and where they came from?
Well, I had two of the most wonderful parents in the world. My mother, her name was Sadie Broad, and it's a very large Broad family in this area, or at least settled here in this community. And she came to this country at age 14 by herself. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman. You wouldn't believe it looking at me, but she was beautiful. And she came to her uncle, Benjamin Berg, who was a pioneer in Springfield and a man that was a most remarkable man. He was a poet, he was a writer, he was a businessman, but he was one of the first settlers in Springfield. Everybody who came to Springfield came to Benjamin Berg, and she came to him. My mother and father were very distantly related, cousins, but far removed. And when she came here, she went to work in Dad's store. My father, by that time, he started the usual conventional method, peddler, horse and buggy, but it built up a rather substantial store that was the beginning of a department store. But it was located on the south end of Springfield, the Italian section. He anticipated that Springfield would grow south of the State Street line. Instead, it turned up State Street. But at any rate, that South End district was a magnificent place. I was born on Acushnet Avenue, which is in the Italian section, and it was such a wonderful place to live with all their activities and festivities and christenings and marches in the street with the holy images that they carried and the lights and the music. It was really, and no crime in those days. And Dad had a store that was very, very successful.
What did he sell in his store?
It was a dry goods store and children's specialty shop.
What was it called?
It was called Cooley's Dry Goods Store. It's still a large building on South Main Street that's now occupied by Field Eddy and something there, a very large insurance company. He had also built a block over the store with the understanding that the store would expand eventually into a department store. And it would have. However, there had been unfortunately, an explosion on the south end. There had been 2 floods on the south end, and as a result of it, the whole district changed, and people that had been responsible moved out. I'm talking, it still is an Italian section, but not with all the wonderful lifestyle that they have some, but they have festivals and lights and that.
What year was that when it changed?
Well, that had to be, he must have started early 1900. I was born in 1913, December 1913, and it was a wonderful life. But everybody, all the relatives that came to this country, all of them came and worked in my father's store. It was a big enough store to accommodate all of them, and a successful store. We had a very peculiar experience as early in our childhood. My father was a very righteous and religious man. I don't mean not strictly Orthodox, but he, all the holidays, and he loved to go to shul, and he loved to take us to shul with him, and we would go. And what happened was his father had been a judge in Poland. As a matter of fact, this is a picture, and he had such a tremendous reverence for the law and from the standpoint of always conducting yourself on a high level, on high moral standards. And he was determined that my brother, who was older than I was, and I would both be lawyers. That was, he'd impressed us with the law and with the integrity of the law and being a judge. The greatest dream that we never even dreamt it then, but we've been imbued with such admiration and respect and affection for a grandfather we never knew, that it was, from the time Eddie was born, there was no question he was going to be a lawyer. And Dad used to stand him on a table, and he would make speeches at age 4 whenever we'd go to shul or wherever there was an opportunity. And he was eloquent. He was great. So we lived in Springfield together. We had a wonderful life, and then we moved out of the Italian section, I don't remember about when, into the Forest Park section. We lived on Sumner Terrace, which is directly the next street to where the Kadima Senate ultimately set up. And we were great tennis players because the tennis courts were directly across the street. But at an early stage, whenever there wasn't a minyan in shul, the shamash used to come over to Forest Park and pull us off the course. We were practically living on the course because it was right across the street from where we lived. So that at an early age, I really became pretty proficient, not only at making a minyan, but I knew a little bit, a lot, than most kids did about davening because I was there all the time.
You'd be wearing your tennis outfit, they take you right into shul.
Right to the shul. I remember several, matter of fact, this went on for a couple of years. And it was until one day an uncle of mine came to America. He was living in New York. He was a very learned man, and he got the job as a shamus of Kadima.
At Oakland Street.
At Oakland Street, which even bound the cheese a little tighter.
And what was his name?
Mesha, Uncle Moshe. I don't remember what it, Broad.
Moshe Broad.
It was a Broad. We were all in the Broad family on my mother's side, and she had a large family.
Can you name a few of the Broads who lived in Springfield?
I can. They're all very well known. There was Charlie Broad, who was her younger brother. There was Leon Broad, also a younger brother. There was Aunt Figachaya, Mrs. Davis, who was a most pious woman I've ever met, and she had a large family on the north end who were remarkably talented in music. One of her daughters, who at an early age, I'm talking probably about 10, she was so talented. She played with the Springfield Symphony Orchestra. And they were very poor. Her husband was a carpenter, and he did much of the construction of my father's. He kept it in the family. He was a great carpenter. He built a building, or and he built the stores. He did everything. But anyhow, my dad had impressed both my brother and I. Your word is your bond, and he was a person who. If he shook hands, that was the deal. You needed no lawyers, and he impressed us. That was very, very important, and we grew up with that belief. Eddie was an eloquent as a child, as a result of all his fostering and my father was an excellent, outstanding speaker all through his life.
What did Eddie end up doing?
He ended up as he and I'm going to come to that. Eddie and Ed became one of the great labor specialists in this part of the country. He was known everywhere. Little guy, shorter than I am, but he was so talented. I spent my whole life trying to beat him at something. Everything he did better. he was a good athlete. He was an eloquent speaker as a child, all through life. He took it with him into the practice of law. He was a great athlete, golf, tennis. I couldn't beat him at anything. The only thing I did is I got married before he did. That was the only thing that I can point to. And I must admit, I spent my whole life trying to beat him at something. I loved him. He was the most wonderful brother, and we were so close up to the time of his death. He died about last week. It would be 10 years. I just went to short side. Anyhow, he was shorter than I, and I'm short. As a result of it, the war came along. He couldn't go in. He had gone to Wharton School of Finance and graduated from Pennsylvania, came back, and then there was no question he was going to be a lawyer. So he went to this, what was then Northeastern, it's now Western New England College, and excelled. And I, at that time, I was having the most exciting life because I was a musician. Not a musician in the formal sense, but a musician, type of dance band. So at probably by the age of 13, with talent, not great talent, but talent, I had a magnificent ear. If I heard a song, I could play it on a piano. And Mom immediately bought me a baby grand piano, which she paid out $1 a week. And she encouraged me, and by age 13 and 14, I wasn't great, but I was good. And I was playing everywhere. So then by age 14 or 15, I'd already organized my own orchestra, and we played all of our mitzvahs and all the dances and all the weddings, and not all of them, but a lot of the Jewish thing. And for me, it was a labor of love, and it was lucky. I'm lucky it didn't ruin me, because when I was playing with a band at 15, 14, I might make $5 for something that was not work at all. It was play. It was play. And the average kid my age was shoveling sidewalks, cutting grass, working his tail off to make maybe 50 cents, you know what I mean, or $1 if he did. And so you develop that philosophy, which is true today in show business, any kind of that kind of easy. It's a game. It's easy come and easy go. My mother, who recognized my limitations, she knew I was good, but I wasn't great. She says, "Look, I'm not going to have one son a successful attorney and the other one going to be a klezmer and trying to make a living in different beer joints. You're going to play, you're going to have your band, you're going to help your brother get through school, and when he gets through, he'll help you get through school." And that's exactly what we did. I didn't have to help much, but I helped. Whatever monies I made, everybody brought their monies home. We were spending it, and he excelled, and in no time he'd started Well, he went in with a very famous Jewish lawyer who was, I think, one of the first Jewish judges in this area, Harry Ehrlich, who, incidentally, his father was one of the founders of the Kadima Synagogue.
Is that Moses?
Moses.
Moses.
Moses was Harry's, and Harry was more than a friend. My Aunt Sarah, who married one of my father's brothers, was a sister of Harry Ehrlich. So our families were almost mishpah. We were close, very close. So he had a successful law practice, and he took Eddie in after he graduated, and then until Eddie decided it was time for him to go on his own, and he did, and he started the first Franklin D. Roosevelt Club in this area, which became very large, and he became very well known as a labor lawyer. He even represented one of the first sit-down strikes. Milton Bradley had a sit-down strike, and he ended up going to Washington and dealing with John L. Lewis, who at that time was a major factor in the labor movement because he represented a parent company, and Eddie at that time was representing unions. As I love Eddie so much, I know this is not about Ed, but let me just tell you a little bit about him. He went on to, his talents as a speaker were remarkable. Here he is, this little guy, and I mean a little, shorter than I am, and I'm short. Whenever he gets up, pearls. Everybody. So he became a great trial lawyer as in the labor field, and I think he has the distinction in the course of his career of having represented 5 different mayors, not the same administration, but 5 different administrations, all who used him as their chief bargaining, and even though they had a law department, he was that great. Well, anyhow, I mentioned that for a reason, because the war came along. Ed couldn't go, so I got drafted. Fortunately, I had just completed my graduation from law school.
You went to Northeastern?
And that was just like Paul Bloom. That was in as he told you, it was over the YMCA, and two floors they had for a law school, and they used to have practitioners, lawyers, successful lawyers in different fields would lecture to us on the course, and surprisingly gave us some very, very good preparation for passing the bar. Well, I was fortunate, and I passed the bar. And that's a story in itself that I've got to tell, because it's funny. When we left, they had what was known, they may still have it, a crash course, where you go down to Boston and take a review and then a re-review for 2 weeks. And there were about 9 of us in our class, and they were all fellows like myself who were working days and going to school at night. So they're very serious about work, and they were all about, academically, about on a par, except for one fellow. We have one man by the name of Harrison Clapp, who had gone to Amherst and graduated summa cum laude, and was now, while he was going to this night school, was part of the legal department and the secretary of the Mass Mutual, one of the huge lawyers. Well, there was no question he was going to pass the first time. But the passage on the bar is on a graduated scale, and they know before that 20% of those that take it will graduate, and they don't want, so that they gear their marking level to do that. The 9 of us, other than Harris and Clapp, are all substantially about equally, it's academically. Well, we go down to Boston, and everybody is working so hard, and nobody will let anybody else out of their sight, or they don't want them studying any more than they are, you know. On the day of the exam, we were walking to the Old English, I think it's called the Old English Latin School in Boston. That's where the exam was given. And this was the time of the Depression. And as we're walking along, the 9 of us, all of us, we pass, that was the time when people were selling stuff on the street, apples and shoelaces and pencils. We all walked past them, and for some unknown reason, I turned around and went back, and I bought a pencil from him. I gave him $1, and he said, "God bless you," and I said to him, "You know, today's the day I can use all of his help." You know, I wasn't the best guy in the class, I was average. I was one of the 3 that passed the bar, and it could have been any one of them. We were all equal, you know. I had some twist. I'm convinced that the thing that got me through was the guy that I bought the shoelace from, and as a result of it, I can no more walk past Becker or anybody on the street who's asking for a handout, even though I know he's the biggest faker in the world. This is a lesson that's been so impressed on me. I have it to this very day. It's an interesting story. But anyhow, so I always tell young law students, when you get ready to take the bar, if you ever see anybody selling any shoestrings or apple cider, be sure you buy one, because it may do you a good stead. It did me. Well, anyhow, now we come to the war, which is the most important part of my life. And I was drafted, and and after I got into the recruit reception center, I was there for about maybe 90 days, maybe 9 months, maybe. Then I went to OCS, but I was too short, so I had to get a waiver and all that stuff. And I went to OCS, and I came out a 2nd lieutenant. That was a wonderful experience at OCS, except for one thing. It's the first time, and probably the only time, that I have knowingly encountered anti-Semitism. And I had never experienced it before, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I was good academically. A lot of the fellows in the OCS class were fellows who'd come back from combat already. Academically, they were, they were sergeants, they were soldiers, but they had, and I had very little of the training, soldier training, actually the Army training. So I would work to deal with them, with some of them, where they would help me with assembling a machine gun. I'm all thumbs, putting together a roll and all the different things. But the first week I got there, there was and I couldn't believe it, because I never had encountered it before. Our platoon commander was a tall, handsome Swede. And he, for some reason, he took one look at me, and he says, "Listen, Cooley, you're not going to make it, so you might as well go now. It'll hurt less. Otherwise, I'm going to have to flunk." I hadn't even met the man, and he made my life miserable. Miserable. I said I had all these other people there that we were exchanging. I was helping them with their academic part. They were helping me with the actual physical, and so that if you passed it, you passed it. He would march the division, he marched the unit, the platoon, with the tall guys in front, so that I would have to be busting my, just to keep up with them. All the things were done. But at any rate, I eventually got through, and now I'm a second lieutenant.
You felt he was doing this because you were Jewish?
I know he was. He told me. He didn't say Jewish. He never mentioned the word Jewish. But he hadn't even met me. He says, you're not going to, just like that. I couldn't understand. I'd never since, and never before experienced it. I mean, the dislike for Eddie, just, it's just if I were to shake hands with you for the first time, and you would start telling me what a terrible person I am. You haven't even met me yet. You don't even know my name, Anyhow, that was something that I've never forgotten. Thank goodness it was my only experience with anthrax, directly as it affected me. And it was unforgettable. So anyhow, now it was time to go, and I'm going around there. When you're a second lieutenant and they haven't got a place, they didn't want at that time lawyers or engineers. They had an abundance. So they ended up, after a number of different trial assignments where they send you for 30 days to this camp, and St. Louis, and to Texas, and there was a new division being activated in Macomb, Mississippi, called the Blood and Fire Division, the 63rd Infantry Division. And that's where I was assigned. I was assigned to become part of the cadre of that. Okay. Now, whenever you go between assignments, you can always get a 10-day delay in route. And I felt I was going to an infantry division. It was going to be a new life, a very difficult life. God knows what. I had worked all my life, because my father died at a very early age, very early, 55, 53. And so, and my brother and I, who at that time had no skills. I mean, he was going to school, I was playing in a band, but weren't making a living and supporting your mother and her family. So it was a difficult life doing that up to that point. So I figured, I've got 10 days, I'm going to have a fling. I'm going to take the first vacation I ever had in my life. And where am I going to take it? I'm going to take it en route to Macomb, Mississippi. I'm going to the wildest, funnest place in the world, New Orleans. 10 days, a brand new second lieutenant, money in my pocket, in the world. And it was the wildest place I've ever been. And it's the most fortuitous thing that ever happened to me. Because after about 5 days of the type of living I've done, I mean, orgy, unbelievable what it was during the war anyhow. And New Orleans is wild enough at that time without the war, but with the war, believe me, for a single second lieutenant, you could even be short and unattractive, and it was very exciting. So after 5 days, I figured, geez, I can't handle anymore. This is more. And if I'm going into an infantry division, I had better take a few days to rest up. This is the most important part of my life, really. So I decided I would, the jump-off point to Macomb, Mississippi was Baton Rouge. And I said, well, I'll take the train. It was about from Boston to Springfield, up to Baton Rouge. I'll spend 2 days just resting up, and then I'll report to my division. Well, when you're traveling government, you travel first class. So I'm going Pullman. I'm on a Pullman, and there are only 3 other people in the car between New Orleans, and one of them was a very attractive woman, older than I was. And so I said, I felt like talking. And I said, down. She said, sure. So we start to talk. She turns out to be Bud's aunt and the clerk of courts of Baton Rouge, her province. And I had told her I was a lawyer, you know, and just passed the bar, didn't know anything. And her brother, Puz's uncle, Victor Saxe, was one of the most prominent lawyers in the country. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. He had a firm down there in Baton Rouge. His partner was the president of the Louisiana State College. I mean, he represented the Republic of France. He represented, you know, so we're talking, and we have a lot to talk about. And she says, and I tell her I'm going up to the Macomb, Mississippi, and she said, have you ever been in Baton Rouge before? And I said, no. She said, well, it's a very interesting place. She said, Huey Long, you know, and the Capitol, and all these activities. She says, well, how long are you going to be here? I said, 2 days. She said, would you like to see the town? I said, I would love to. She said, well, maybe I can get my niece to take you around. Well, the last thing my wife wanted was a blind date with a little guy that she never wanted. But anyhow, they're very hospitable, very hot. And we went around and we went everywhere and saw Baton Rouge was an exciting, exciting place. And, oh, by the way, and she had been picked up. She said she would give me a ride to my hotel. And it was some distance from the station. And her, Puz's grandmother, and Puz's another aunt were picking her up. And wonderful, lovely, charming people, you know what I mean? So they drove me to my hotel, and then later I called Puz. She wasn't excited about it, but she was very good about it. And then we stayed in Mississippi for almost a year. So I started to come back every weekend. And before we went overseas, we were engaged. And that family, I have never met anybody like. They did so many. She had an aunt who later became blind. Aunt Rose lived on a plantation, you know, well, on a farm. They called it, that was called a plantation. She was the first woman, Jewish woman, to travel a horse and buggy to Carville, Mississippi, from south of Baton or west of Baton Rouge to the leper colony. And she did it with such regularity that they named one of the avenues in this leper colony for Rose Abramson. She was single. She never married, and she lived in Puzzy's home. I didn't know her when she was doing those. She was already blind, completely blind, and living with her sister, who was Puzzy's grandmother, who was also an invalid. So Puzzy was living in a house with a blind aunt, with an invalid, and not because her father couldn't afford to have, and the amazing thing about it was, they didn't, and they had, you know, reasonable need, but they didn't shunt them off into the back room. The whole house moved around Aunt Rosie and Gammy they call it. So that she had an experience as a child, which is to this day, sometimes you don't want to. It upsets you when you go around people who are suffering, who are dying, who have gone blind, who have cancer, and it does that to me. I kind of pushes me away. I don't thrive in that element. For her, she only looks for people that nobody has got, and I can't her. She only does, and she's been all of her life. She finds people that have got so many ailments and maladies and have nobody, and then she thanks them for letting her help them. God bless her. I don't know what I do. She's made my life a dream. I have 62 years of marriage that somebody may be able to equal, but they sure can't surpass it. Well, anyhow, I come into the part that
let's get you to Germany and what happened.
That's what is really important.
Okay, let's go.
I was with the 63rd Infantry Division all through the war, and matter of fact, our regimental commander, Ernest K. Wheeler, I'll never forget him. Later, he was a colonel then, but the division so distinguished itself that he later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's dead today, but I was later on his staff as a division transportation officer. So we get through the war, and I could tell you counters, but that's not important. It had nothing particular to do with, but all through the war, I never encountered with my army. I'm sure there were people that didn't like me, a little guy, captain, you know what I mean, all that stuff. But I never encountered that. I have already recited the only incident that I ever had of anti-Semitism. I had wonderful associates. So anyhow,
you went through Germany.
The war is over. We've gone through the Siegfried Line. We've distinguished ourselves. First one's through, a big plaque, pictures. Now we're in Germany.
The war's over.
The war is over, and the Allies have put together 4 zones: American, French, Russian, and English. And suddenly, for the first time, the United States Army is looking for people to run,
to administer
their zone. And how do they do it? They go through a list of MOS numbers. My MOS number is lawyer. I had never had a case. I had never had a client. I had never been in court. My division goes back to the States. I'm frozen and sent to this very, very small contingent in Bayreuth, Germany.
Bayreuth.
Bayreuth is a hotbed of Nazi.
Is this where Wagner was?
This is where the Wagner house.
Oh, okay.
This is where the Richard Wagner was. And I'm assigned with, there are only, only about 10 in our unit, and we had an area of over 200,000 people. There was a Jewish rabbi, Rabbi Spiro, he was a chaplain in the army, whom I got to meet. And when he found out there was a Jewish officer in the Bayreuth area, he was traveling the whole zone. And at that time, the concentration camps were just being opened, freed. liberated, he told everybody, come to Beirut. It's a Gan Eden. We've got Jewish, I didn't know him that well. We became great friends, Irving Spiro.
He told all the people being released from the camps, go
Well,
to
not all,
Beirut.
but they came in
Go to
flock.
Beirut. Uh-huh.
Came in flock, and they were cadavers. They were skin and bones. They still had their dirty, their uniforms, the star, just the way they came out of the camps. Well, we had at that time, thank God, an edict that our policy was supposed to be to eliminate, not by eliminate, that's not the right, to remove any Nazis in power or in authority and replace them with people who were judgment free. I mean, politically clean is what it was, not judgment, politically clean. Now, here, this for me, they're telling me to do something that if I would love to do, but now I can do it with authority. So we started in establishing, housing, food, clothing, putting them in places where they could work, where they could earn a living, with all the different. It really was a Gan Eden for them in no time. And the thing that I came away with is this tremendous feeling of survival. These people that came and that survived, I may not have been really the cream of our society, but they were going to survive whatever it took. Another day, another hour, another week. I mean, that was a feeling with such intensity. You had to admire, you could.
Did they know you were Jewish?
Oh yes, they knew. They knew. We had services there. We did everything there. So what we did then is most of them, all of them practically, wanted to get out of Germany. That first thing, you had to build them up physically and financially, in other words. But they couldn't go anywhere. Israel was closed to them, and America wouldn't take them. No place. I guess some of them ended up in Canada, or maybe a few ended
Australia.
up in Brazil, but they couldn't go anywhere. So what we did in this area, Julius Streicher was one of the great I don't mean great.
Infamous.
One of the foremost leaders among the Nazis, Hitler's. He had a magnificent estate within my district. So we appropriated he already was in in Nuremberg. We appropriated the estate. It had buildings, the feeling was Israel at that time was an agrarian state. Many of these people are like you and I. They knew no more. They didn't know the front end of a horse from the back. They knew nothing about farming. They knew nothing except whatever they did in their particular shtetl, the town, or teachers, sing, whatever they did. So we set up a place where they could learn animal husbandry. We set up a camp. It was like a camp, but it was not restrictive, you know what I mean? Got them top education in agrarian things, best accommodations we could, and it became so successful that the 12th Corps from the Army sent over General Keating to take pictures of the operation of that camp, and they're in the Jewish Hatifa Museum. And I gave a lot of those pictures, and things from Beirut, so that whatever I'm telling you, you'll find supportive there. You won't in pictures. So anyhow, they came from the 12th Corps, and he was a major general, I remember, and took pictures of the camp. And this camp with Rabbi Spiro, he didn't stay there. He traveled his own. But when we had their first, with the matzah Passover, we had a Passover service of about well over 150 concentration camp inmates with Spiro Agada. And in it, first they recited the traditional Exodus from Egypt, slavery in Egypt. Then they told their own slavery. It was the most touching story that you could ever imagine. It wasn't, you couldn't have a dry eye about their enslavement and their freedoms from slavery now. This was, a modernization of bringing it up to date. So that it was it was an experience that if I live to be 100, 150, I shall never forget, and I'm so grateful that the thing I have to tell you, it's unbelievable that a guy with 2 bars, a captain, could have as much power as you can have in a military government.
And could accomplish so much good.
Well, if you want to. But I'm just saying that you're not like a mayor, not like a governor. You don't have any laws of your own. And you say this is so, it's so. You have, so it's really, that is so that I walked away from, as a result, I was there over a year and finally got home and got married and just with reference to that, came home, my brother was waiting for me. He says, okay, we start a firm. Here, it's Cooley and Cooley. I said, Eddie, I haven't even got anything to put into it. Go, what are you worrying about it? Cool. And that's the way it always was, half and half. And so we started the firm, and there was a politician in this area, Foster Furcolo. Not a politician, a guy we grew up with and knew. He lived in Longmeadow. Dear friend, and when all of his, he went to Yale, the Yale Law School, and whenever all the people he'd been associated with went on to other things, we invited him to join our firm. So we changed the name to Cooley, Furcolo, and Cooley. And he remained there until he became the governor. Now I'm coming to how I became a judge. When he became, and we were, I can't tell you how close we were as friends, because I have never met anybody in my life whom I respected more for the way he treated people. It was genuine. He could know no baloney, I didn't know that. But he could make a sweeper or somebody cleaner feel like they were 10 feet tall. And he didn't do it as part of the political agenda. He did it because he loved people, And, he started things like the junior college and various things that are indicative of the type of person. Anyhow, he is the person I most admire. So he is now a governor, and his as close a friend as I've got in the world. I mean, nobody that you pick up the phone, the Foster, he calls us, both Eddie and I, down to Boston. Go in his office, what's the matter with us? He says, I have been looking, and I've got a judge that I want to bestow. But he said, I don't know who to give it to. I don't know whether to give it to you, Eddie, or to Sid. And I'm not going to make that decision. He says, I want you to go back, talk it over between yourself, and whoever you decide, he said, that's who I'll appoint. He said, this is a wonderful judgeship, because he says, I don't know how long they'll permit you to do that, but this is where you can still practice law and be on the bench. At that time, the DA could do that too. So, and it was in Greenfield. So we went back, and my father had it so impressed us with. There was no greater, next to being a god, there was nothing greater you could be than a judge, you know. And we have, all our life, we've had that reverence and respect for the law. Still have, to some degree. It's been jaundiced a little bit with my actions of different people, but the law is the law, and I was brought up to revere it, and so was Eddie. So, and Eddie was exactly like me. I mean, no different. We had the same
Principal.
exposure, same father. So, Ed says, I said, Eddie, you're older. I mean, this is where I covered. You're older. Firm is established. You know, you should have it. And you would want it. I know how bad you want it. And he said, no, Sid, he said, your temperament is really far better suited for it than I am. He said, I've got this very successful labor practice. He said, I really think it would be better if you took it. So after discussion, not much after that, we went back the next week to Foster. We said me. Well, it turned out to be, it was a wonderful time to go on the bench. It was a labor of love for me. I went to Greenfield later. I became presiding judge of Westfield, but we had to give up the part-time almost within 6 months. And that was not a good thing. It should not have been allowed in the first place. But that was the law, you know what I mean? But during the 6 months, it was a schmutz scribble. You know, the guy that's coming in front of you as an adversary, the next day is coming in front of you as pleading a case. You know, he's got a box kind of easily the way he treats you. Well, anyhow, it was being on the bench was one of the greatest experiences.
What kind of cases did you hear?
Well, it so happened that we heard everything, because it wasn't quite as, they didn't have as specialized. I ended up appointed by a Republican governor to Westfield, and Westfield was one of the greatest courts, a district court, and they, at that time, it had a jurisdiction of everything. Minors, adolescents, you know what I mean? Everything, criminal stuff, you could name it, everything. It was a local court with a large population, but a small population comparatively, compared to Springfield, and a court where the community loved their court, really loved their court. You could get cooperation from everybody. Cooperation from the Air National Guard who were in there, cooperation from the college who would use their interns, from the clergy who were interested, from the schools, from the college itself there, Westfield State. So as a result of it, we were able to come up with some very, very creative concepts of how you handle cases. For example, we had Stanley Home, which was such an it was an industry, a large industry then in Westfield. It has the Stanley Park, and it was a huge industry for Westfield. And I got very friendly with the president, and as a result, if we needed anything, and the Commonwealth was very skimpy about being concerned about a place like Westfield. So I would call him. We had we were beginning to get a little problem with graffiti. So we come up with a program of, they put it on, they got to take it off. Okay, that concept is good, but how do you do it? You got to have special kinds of acid. Acid is dangerous. You can't let kids work with it. So I called the president of the Stanley Home, very good friend. He came right down, brought his hand to chemist. In no time, they the acid. Now, how you going to administer this? Because this is on a Saturday. You can't do it while they're in school. They're National Guard. Utilizing them, you know what I mean? They were delighted to play a part. The college was delighted to furnish interns. Nobody is getting paid for this. This is all without pay.
How many years were you a judge in Westfield? When did you retire?
I retired in 82, I think.
Did you go back to the practice of law?
Then I went back to my own firm.
And are you still practicing?
Well, I go in every day. I would hardly call it practice because I have practically no visibility. I'm legally blind, and my hearing, I have 2 hearing aids.
So people consult with you?
They can. I mostly work and enjoy working with other younger lawyers who are in the firm, and sometimes I can give them some creative thinking that they can utilize based on some experience.
What advice would you give a lawyer going into law today? Simply, what kind of things would you say to them today?
Well, I'll tell you, this is a little humorous, but here's what I tell a graduating class. It's something that was taught me. I say, remember, always remember that when the facts are with you, you bang away at the jury. When the law's with you, you bang away at the judge. And when you don't have either the facts or the law with you, then you bang away at the table. No, I really don't have. They're very ambitious. Unfortunately, they're turning them out in large numbers. The bar has to a large degree deteriorated, but there still are people on the bench and in practicing law with highest standards who I respect. It's a wonderful profession.
Tell me about your mother.
My mother was just marvelous, and when she got in her 90s, she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. My father was madly in love with her. When he died, we lived with her, and somebody whom we'd known all our life, Meyer Kinsler. The Kinsler family are the ones who started the Jewish Home for the Aged. Wonderful. My wife was dead, and he fell in love with her, and they married, and we loved him. He was a wonderful man. But for the first time in her life, she was experiencing Florida, cruise. I mean, he was well situated. And he was a nice man, and he loved life. But he went in for a routine operation. I mean, routine. He went to Boston, I remember to this day, to have something like his bladder stretched or something. And it was done successfully. But then he developed the hiccups. And he hiccuped. They couldn't stop the hiccups until he eventually had a heart attack and died. So that was number two. Unfortunately, Mom didn't inherit from him, but she had a wonderful life, and he was a wonderful man. We loved him. The third, it's unbelievable, he adored my mother. The third man to come along was Max Schreck from Pittsfield. They were the Schreck Baking Company. He fell, man. As I said, she was a beautiful.
How old was your mother at this point?
Oh, she must have been in her 70s, 80s, maybe. And she kept herself physically. You would see her on her back doing bicycle exercise. She was vain.
Mm-hmm.
She really was beautiful. But good. She had a slogan, and she used two things I always remember until she taught it. One is life, probably not her. She had worldly wisdom, not book learning. Life is like a looking glass. You only get out of it what you put into it. Nothing more and nothing less. That was one of her slogans. The other slogan that she practiced, the other thing that she
Her motto, yeah.
spoke of was don't tell, this is when she was really old, don't tell other people your troubles. They don't want to hear your troubles. Talk about their troubles. Unless, if you want to talk about your own, they ain't going to come back and see you anymore because they're not interested. She was adored. It's rare. She was adored. She was a wonderful, charitable, high principle, concerned with her brothers and her sisters and her family, particularly with her children, and she had three men who were all, including my father, madly in love with her. What an incredible lifestyle she had. And you know, I have a son who would call me, Larry, who I have a child that's handicapped, but Larry happens to be just the reverse. He brilliant, and he going to school and graduating summa cum laude was easier for him than for my other child to learn to ride a bicycle. And he's a good boy, and he's working in wonderful things around the world. I'm very, very proud of him. But he comes back from college, and here he's studying. He thought that originally he was going to be, I couldn't believe it, but he thought he might want to be a rabbi. In his it changed quick, first year, and he was studying philosophy. And, you know, great, he's got a mind like, he comes back, and at that time, my wife is still a smoker, a big smoker. First thing in the morning on a cup of coffee, and he walks in and he says, "Mom, I made up my mind. Either you stop smoking or I quit school." And I mean it. And when Larry said something, you had to believe it. She believed him, you know what I mean? And she said, "Larry, ask me anything. Don't ask. You know, I need it. Mom, it's either or." She quit on that day. And he didn't quit school. He went on to become an intern with Uthan, and then go to all over the African countries, and then form his own developing country. and now he serves more than 85 countries around the world.
Development.
Development. In Washington.
I'm Pudsey Cooley. My real name is Annie Violet Saxey Cooley, and I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My mother was Debbie Saxey, and my dad was Maurice Saxey. And both of my grandparents lived in Baton Rouge, but I didn't know my grandfathers, just my two grandmothers, who all lived in Baton Rouge. And when my mother was a little girl, her father died, and for a little while they went to live up in the country, about 17 miles away, on a plantation that their family owned at that time.
Was Aunt Rosa?
And I had a great aunt and a grandmother, and they lived together with their parents for a short time. And when my mother outgrew the little country school, they moved to town, to Baton Rouge. And that's where I lived all my life until I came up here.
And you were raised in a Jewish family. Can you tell us about Jewish life in Baton Rouge a little bit?
Well, they were not that many. We had one temple, and it was a Reform temple. And I don't remember just how large the congregation was, but I did go to Sunday school and I was confirmed. We didn't have bar mitzvahs there, but we did have confirmation.
Was it difficult being a Jewish person in Baton Rouge?
No, not at all. They were very much assimilated. That there was such a small population that I guess they were more or less accepted and taken in.
You didn't feel prejudice or anti-Semitism?
The only thing we knew was the country club didn't take in any Jewish people there. But other than that, we didn't really feel it very much at all. No, we didn't.
But a lot of them were very successful up there, weren't they?
They were, yeah. A lot of successful Jewish people in Baton Rouge. And they were very well accepted.
And you happened to meet this man how?
When he was in the Army.
How'd you meet him?
My aunt met him on the train, my dad's sister. He was coming from New Orleans to Baton Rouge after having been in New Orleans for a short time on leave. He said he was worn out, so he was going to come to report to Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi early. So when he got on the train in New Orleans, he got in the Pullman because he was running at the government's expense, and there were only 3 people there, and one of them was my aunt, and he said to her, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And he sat down and started talking, and she worked at the Clerk of Courts, and he had just passed the Bar Association, so they had a lot to talk about. And she said my grandmother and her sister, my aunt, were coming to meet him, and they gave him a ride to the hotel, and she said she thought I'd be glad to show him around Baton Rouge, so she had him call me.
You're verifying his same story.
Yes.
And he says you're the love of his life. You're the best thing ever. This is what made a difference in his whole life,
really
meeting you.
is.
Well,
but I do think
it's
you ought to
mutual.
know this one. Baton Rouge, her family were not from where we came from, Poland, and
Oh, yeah, where
they
were
were mostly German Jews.
Yes, they were.
They were German Jews, and they were very, very much. They became intermingled. There was a lot of intermarriage too, but the ones that were there, I can't say all of them, but were quite successful. Bankers, I mean, these were, and they were treated with respect and recognition, but except for the country club at that time, they
were pretty much
people of
accepted
names,
everywhere.
but they were not many. Not many. And I think you should know this. Although I was brought up with a religious thing, and she had she didn't know a word of Jewish art, not a word,
Yeah.
but of Yiddish or anything like that.
We didn't even have a kosher
They didn't have it.
market or
But
anything.
she knew more about the Jewish holidays, their meaning, their significance, surprisingly, than I did, and because we didn't waste time on that. I was Jewish.
Okay, I want to thank you both on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society for honoring us with this interview today.
Oh, well, thank
Well,
you.
I
I think it's very nice
I gotta
But you're
say this,
interested.
there's no sweeter words to a judge's ear than the sound of his own voice. I don't know if you know that or not, but that's a truism.
We'll
And
end
I'm
on
no
that note.
exception.